A warm welcome to Lesbian Tales Unfolded. We appreciate each one of you being here. Before we begin, we'd love to know which corner of the globe are you watching from. Share with us in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. I was running, late again. The universe had decided that the first day of fall semester wasn't challenging enough without my car making death rattles in the faculty parking lot. Perfect timing. Now I stood on the sidewalk stabbing at me phone screen with increasing frustration, trying to summon a rideshare driver who wouldn't take 20 minutes to arrive. Damn app, I muttered, watching the little car icons drift aimlessly around the map, none heading my direction. I glanced at my watch. 15 minutes until my first lecture of the semester, and I still needed to set up my presentation. Being late as the professor sets a wonderful example for students expecting academic excellence. The phone pinged. Finally, driver accepting arrival in 2 minutes. I exhaled with relief, scanning the street for the approaching car. My literature department tote bag weighed heavily on my shoulder, packed with silly and the notes for today's introductory lecture. A sleek blue sedan pulled up, and I confirmed the license plate matched my app. The window rolled down, revealing a young woman with fiery red hair that caught the morning sunlight like copper wire. Professor Jenkins. She asked, her blue eyes meeting mine with unexpected intensity. I nodded, caught off guard. That's me. What are the odds? She smiled. I'm heading to campus too. The app paired us as a shared ride. As I slid into the passenger seat, I caught a whiff of something subtle and expensive. Bergamot and vanilla, I guessed. Not the typical graduate student fragrance. I'm Sienna, she said, pulling back into traffic with smooth confidence. Iris Monroe. Just started my doctoral program in comparative literature. Something in my chest tightened slightly. The universe wasn't just throwing car trouble my way. It was now putting an attractive doctoral student in my path. Dr. Nora Caldwell. I replied more stiffly than intended. I teach in the literature department. I know, she said, flicking her eyes toward me briefly. You're actually why I chose Plano for my doctorate. Your work on female authorship in banned literature is groundbreaking. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Academic recognition always touched me more deeply than I cared to admit. That's flattering. What's your focus area? Subversive feminine narratives in early 20th century literature, she answered, without hesitation. Specifically works that were censored for challenging gender norms. Jesus, practically my exact specialty. I studied her profile as she drove. She couldn't be more than late 20s, but there was a self-possession about her that many of my colleagues twice her age lacked. Well, I look forward to seeing your work, I said, trying to maintain professional distance despite the cramped confines of her car. We pulled into faculty parking, and she flashed an unexpected permit, teaching assistantship, she explained, catching my questioning glance as we walked toward Saal. The English building, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. She kept pace beside me. Actually, Professor Jenkins, I'm registered for your advanced literary theory seminar this afternoon. I stopped walking. You're in my 400 p.m. class. She nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I hope that's not a problem. No, not at all. I lied, suddenly aware of how her fitted blazer emphasized the curves beneath. This was definitely a problem. I just like knowing who my students are in advance. Well, now you know me, she said, her voice dropping slightly as a breeze stirred her hair across her face. I'm looking forward to learning everything you have to teach. The way she emphasized everything sent an inappropriate shiver down my spine. I clutched my bag tighter and nodded, professional smile firmly in place. See you at 4 then. I managed, turning toward my office with what I hoped was professorial dignity, but as I organized my lecture notes, my mind kept returning to copper hair and challenging blue eyes. This semester was not starting, according to plan, 2 weeks into the semester, and Iris Monroe was becoming my beautiful problem. I found myself standing at the lectern mid-sentence about Virginia Woolf's subversive narrative techniques when her hand shot up again. Third time today? Professor Jenkins, wouldn't you say Woolf was deliberately constructing a feminine language to dismantle patriarchal literary traditions rather than simply working within them? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The other doctoral students shifted uncomfortably. None. Prepared to engage at this level, Sienna leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes fixed on mine with unnerving intensity. An interesting perspective, Miss Turner. I responded, trying to ignore how the afternoon light through the windows set her red hair ablaze. Though I'd argue Woolf was more concerned with creating liminal spaces where gender becomes irrelevant rather than specifically feminine language, but her rejection of linear narrative directly contradicts masculine storytelling conventions. Sienna countered. Orlando's transformation isn't just about gender fluidity, but about rejecting the very structure of how stories are told by men. Damn, she was good, too good. The classroom felt suddenly warmer. Perhaps we should continue this after class, I suggested, aware of several students checking their watches. For those interested in further discussion, my office hours are Tuesday, afternoons when. The seminar ended. Sienna lingered, organizing her notes with deliberate slowness until the room emptied. Coffee? She asked simply, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I hesitated. Professional boundaries existed for a reason, but her question about Woolf had genuinely intrigued me. The faculty lounge has terrible coffee, I said. There's a decent place 2 blocks away. We walked in comfortable silence, fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet. The coffee shop was quiet, populated by students hiding behind laptop screens. Your perspective on Woolf is fascinating, I admitted after we'd settled at a corner table. Most students miss the structural radicalism entirely. Most professors miss it too, she replied, blowing gently across her cappuccino. But not you. Your paper on narrative disruption in banned female literature changed how I read everything. Heat rose to my cheeks. That had nothing to do with my Americano academic flattery will get you nowhere. Miss Turner, Sienna, she corrected, and I'm not flattering you. Your work matters to me. There was something disarming about her directness. I found myself sharing theories I'd never voiced in classrooms, ideas too experimental for academic journals. She listened with an intensity that made me feel truly heard, challenging assumptions with respectful but incisive questions. One coffee became a regular Wednesday ritual, then expanded to Mondays after her teaching assistant duties. We'd discuss books, theories, the politics of academia. I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than faculty, meetings, or even my own lectures. You're different than other professors, she told me one evening as we walked back to campus. You don't hide behind academic pretension. I'm old enough not to need the armor. I laughed, though the department chair might disagree. You're not old, she said simply. You're established. There's a difference. The sky darkened suddenly, Texas weather making its typical dramatic shift. Fat raindrops began falling without warning. Damn, I muttered, having left my umbrella in my office. We'll be soaked before we reach campus. Sienna pulled a compact umbrella from her bag, always prepared. She smiled, opening it with a snap, but we'll have to share. The umbrella was barely large enough for one person, forcing us to walk pressed shoulder to shoulder. I could smell her perfume again. That same bergamot and vanilla, stronger now with the rain releasing its notes. Her arm brushed against mine with each step. Literature is about moments like this, she said quietly as we walked the small intimacies that change everything. I glanced at her raindrops catching in her eyelashes and felt something dangerous shift in my chest. Her blue eyes met mine, holding for a moment too long to be purely academic. We should hurry, I said, breaking the gaze. I have papers to grade. But as we rushed across campus under that too small umbrella, our bodies, unavoidably touching, I realized grading papers was the furthest thing from my mind, and that terrified me more than any rainstorm ever could. 1 month into the semester, I found myself working late in my office in the English department's historic West Wing. Most faculty avoided these offices. The heating was temperamental, the Wi-Fi spotty, and the building rumored to be haunted. But I'd always appreciated the solitude and the worn wooden shelves that smelled of lemon oil and old paper. I was measuring the classroom next door for a potential seminar setup when something odd struck me. The hallway should have extended another 10 ft based on the building's exterior, yet the classroom wall seemed to end prematurely. I ran my hand along the plaster, feeling a slight draft. A knock at the door interrupted my investigation. Burning the midnight oil again. Professor Sienna stood in the doorway, casually leaning against the frame. She'd pulled her copper hair into a messy bun, making her look somehow both younger and more intense. Just planning room configurations. I answered suddenly, self-conscious about my bizarre wall examination. Actually, does something seem off about this room to you? Sienna stepped inside, setting her bag down. What? Do you mean the dimensions? The exterior wall of the building suggests this room should be longer. She cocked her head, studying the space with those analytical blue eyes. You're right. There's at least 8 FT unaccounted for 10, I corrected, automatically. I measured her lips, curved into a smile. Of course you did, always thorough. We spent the next hour examining every inch of the suspicious wall, tapping for hollow spots. When Sienna's knuckles produced a distinctly different sound near the bottom bookshelf. We exchanged glances. Help me move this, I said, already pulling books from shelves. The heavy oak bookcase resisted, but with both of us pushing it, finally slid sideways with a groan, revealing a section of wall that looked marginally newer than the surrounding plaster. Look, Sienna pointed, to barely perceptible seams forming a rectangle. It's a door, but there's no handle. I murmured, running my fingers along the edges. Pressure point. Maybe. She pressed various spots until something clicked and the panel swung inward with a puff of dust. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring into darkness. We should call campus security, I said, not moving. Sienna pulled out her phone, activating the flashlight after we look. Before I could protest, she'd slipped through the opening. Professional curiosity overcame caution, and I followed her into the darkness. The hidden room was small but meticulously organized. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes I immediately recognized as banned or censored works from the early 20th century Siennas. Flashlight beams swept across titles that would make a literature professor's heart race: unexpurgated editions, controversial publications, books that had been publicly burned. Holly, this is incredible, Sienna whispered, abandoning formality in her excitement. Some of these are supposed to be lost works. She pulled a leather-bound volume from the shelf, and a bundle of letters fell from between its pages. I caught them before they hit the floor. The paper fragile beneath my fingers, they're handwritten, I said, angling them toward the light, dated 1924. Sienna found a small electric lamp on the desk and switched it on, bathing the room in soft amber light. We huddled together, shoulders touching, as we carefully unfolded the first letter. My dearest, Eleanor, I read aloud. Another day, without your touch, feels like eternity. The department chairman watches me closely now, suspicious of our research collaboration. If only he knew the true nature of what we studied together behind closed doors. It's signed forever, yours, Margaret. Sienna finished, looking up at me with wide eyes. These are love letters between female professors. We're through letter after letter, piecing together the story of Clara Winslow and Eleanor Blackwood literature and classics professors who had conducted a secret relationship while collaboratively researching banned texts. They had created this hidden room as both a repository for forbidden literature and a sanctuary for themselves. The last letter is dated June 1926. Sienna said, her voice hushed. She writes that they're being investigated, that someone has reported them to the university president I was examining. A framed photograph we'd found in the desk drawer. 2 women in 1920s attire standing slightly closer than mere colleagues would. I think I recognize them. There's a faculty photograph from this era in the main hall. Margaret Wellington resigned suddenly, according to department history, and Eleanor met Sienna's eyes, our faces close in the dim light. I don't know. We'll have tour search. The weight of what we discovered hung between us, not just rare books and academic treasures, but the hidden lives of 2 women who had loved in secret within these very walls nearly a century ago. Need to preserve this, I whispered, glancing around the room. All of it. Sienna's hand found mine in the shadows, squeezing gently. We will, she promised together. Late October brought a kill to the air and a new routine to my life. 3 times a week, Sienna and I would meet in my office after hours, slip into our hidden sanctuary, and catalog our discoveries. We'd created a detailed spreadsheet of the books, cross-referencing publication dates, censorship histories, and current rarity. Found another margin. Note, Sienna called from her corner one evening. She'd taken to sitting cross-legged on the floor, red hair cascading over her shoulder as she carefully examined each page with cotton gloves I'd borrowed from the university archives I moved to her. Side-kneeling, Tosi Clara Winslow's neat handwriting. Our shoulders touched as we leaned over the book together. Eleanor believes this passage most clearly defies convention. I read aloud. I believe it is because it reminds her of our summer in Vermont. They annotated these books together. They did everything together, Sienna said softly. Their research, their teaching, their lives, all hidden behind academic collaboration. I glanced at her profile, struck by how the amber lamp illuminated the planes of her face. It must have been lonely keeping so much hidden, but they had each other, she countered, turning to meet my gaze. And this room, something shifted in that moment, acknowledgement of a parallel neither of us was ready to name. I cleared my throat and returned to the catalog. I've never told anyone about my brother, I said, suddenly surprising myself. Sienna looked up, waiting patiently as I continued. He was brilliant, bound for an incredible academic career. Then he developed schizophrenia in his 20s. Now he lives in assisted housing in Houston. Is that why you work so hard? She asked gently, carrying the academic torch for both of you. No colleague had ever understood that connection. No friend had ever asked. Yes, I admitted, feeling exposed yet strangely liberated, though I haven't visited him enough lately. We all hide parts of ourselves, she said, setting down her book and moving closer. I've never told anyone that my research interest in banned literature comes from finding my grandmother's hidden diary. She loved women her entire life, but married my grandfather for appearance's sake. That must have been difficult for her, for both of them. He knew they had an understanding, but she burned every letter she ever received from the woman she truly loved. I reached for another book, needing something to do with my hands. Is that why these letters matter so much to you? They survived, she said simply. Their words survived. Our conversations grew increasingly personal over the following weeks. I found myself sharing stories I'd never told colleagues. My failed engagement years ago, my doubts about the near process, my secret desire to write fiction instead of academic papers. She countered with tales of her chaotic upbringing with artist parents, her disastrous relationships with emotionally unavailable women, her fear that academia might suffocate her creative voice. One night, as November rain pattered against the building's old windows, we lost track of time completely. The antiquated heating system had shut down hours ago, leaving the hidden room chilly. We should go, I said, reluctantly, watching Sienna suppress a shiver. 5 more minutes, she pleaded, engrossed in a rare edition we discovered behind a loose panel. This translation is completely different from the published version. I smiled at her, enthusiasm, and draped my cardigan over her shoulders without thinking. My fingers brushed against the warm skin of her neck, lingering a moment too long. She looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Thank you, she murmured, her voice lower than usual. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how small the room was, how close we stood. Her perfume, that now familiar, bergamot and vanilla, seemed to fill the space between us. I watched her tuck a strand of copper hair behind her ear, the gesture oddly intimate in our secluded sanctuary. Holly, she said, using my first name as she increasingly did when we were alone. Have you ever found something unexpected that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? My heart threw against my ribs as I met her gaze. I'm beginning to, I admitted. She moved closer, close enough that I could see the different shades of blue in her eyes. Her hand reached up, hesitating just inches from my face as if seeking permission. The building's ancient radiators chose that moment to clank violently. Back to life, startling us both, the spell broken. I stepped back, gathering my notes with trembling hands. It's late, I said, not meeting her eyes. We should continue tomorrow. But as we carefully sealed our secret doorway and walked to the parking lot in charged silence, I knew something fundamental had shifted between us, something that, like our hidden room, couldn't remain concealed forever. Attention, faculty. Dean Marcus Whitmore's voice boomed across the crowded meeting room. As part of our university's centennial celebrations, we'll be beginning renovations on the west wing of the English building next month. My blood ran cold. I shot a glance at Sienna sitting in the back row with the other teaching assistants. Her face had gone pale beneath her freckles. The historic restoration will include removing several non-original walls added during the 1950s remodel. He continued, pointing to architectural drawings projected on the screen. We'll be restoring the original floor plan while updating electrical and heating systems. I raised my hand, trying to keep it steady. Dean Marcus Whitmore, which specific eras will be affected? He clicked to a blueprint showing exactly where our hidden room was located. We'll be focusing on the second floor offices, yours included, Professor Jenkins. Don't worry, we'll relocate you temporarily after the meeting. Sienna caught up with me in the hallway, careful to maintain professional distance with colleagues milling around. We need to move everything, she whispered urgently. Tonight, I nodded. Meet me at 8, bring packing materials. The hours until evening crawled. By when we finally slipped into our secret room that night, the space felt different, threatened. We worked quickly, carefully wrapping the most fragile volumes in acid-free paper I'd borrowed from the archives. Where will we take them? Sienna asked, sealing a box of letters. My house has a secure basement office. We can store everything there temporarily. She paused, a first edition Virginia Woolf in her hands. We're saving history that would otherwise be lost. We're stealing university property. I corrected, though. I continued packing. Property they don't even know exists, she argued. Property that would probably disappear into some administrative storage or get damaged during renovation. She was right, of course. We worked in focus. Silence carefully, cataloging each item before packing it away. As Sienna reached for a book on a high shelf, her fingers dislodged something that tumbled to the floor with a metallic clatter. I picked it up, a tarnished silver locaton, a delicate chain. Inside was a tiny photograph of Eleanor and what appeared to be a lock of dark hair. Margaret must have hidden this here, I murmured, feeling like an intruder in their private lives. Sienna examined the back, where initials were engraved. Look at this inscription: forever, despite everything. What do you think everything was? I was about to respond when we heard it, voices. In the hallway, maintenance workers after hours. We froze, staring at each other in panic. They can't find us here, I whispered. Or the open wall. Sienna quickly closed their remaining boxes while I moved toward the hidden door to secure it. The voices grew closer. We wouldn't have time to escape without being seen. We have to stay, she mouthed, pointing to the secret room. In nodded, and we slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind us. The small space, now half empty from our packing, felt suddenly much smaller with the knowledge that we were trapped. We stood frozen, barely breathing, as footsteps entered my office. Jenkins's office needs new wiring, for sure. A gruff voice said, whole place is ancient. Got to check the adjoining classroom too. Another replied in the darkness. Sienna pressed against me as we backed away from the door. There was barely room to stand with the boxes taking up floor space. Her back hit my chest and I instinctively steadied her with my hands at her waist. Sorry, she whispered so softly it was barely audible. I should have let go, I didn't. We remained locked together, her body warm against mine as the maintenance workers moved around my office, discussing repair plans mere feet from our hiding place. They're going to tear out this whole wall, one said, and I felt Sienna tense against me. My arms tightened around her reflexively, protectively. She leaned back slightly, her head coming to rest against my shoulder. I could feel her heartbeat racing as fast as my own, though whether from fear of discovery or our unexpected intimacy, I couldn't tell. Minutes stretched like hours as the workers continued their inspection. When the door to my office finally closed and footsteps receded down the hall, neither of us moved immediately. The darkness wrapped around us, somehow both suffocating and liberating. Slowly, reluctantly, I dropped my arms and stepped back. Sienna turned to face me, nearly invisible in the darkness except for the gleam of her eyes. Holly, she whispered, her voice thick with something unspoken. My hand found hers in the darkness, our fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. For one suspended moment, I thought she might close the distance between us. Instead, she gently squeezed my hand and said, "We should check if they're really gone." The spell broken, we carefully opened our hiding place and emerged into my office, the fluorescent lights harsh after the intimate darkness. But as we continued packing our historical treasures, something had undeniably shifted between us. Something that, like the secrets in Margaret and Eleanor's letters, could not remain hidden much longer. "This is quite the place," Sienna said, running her hand along the wooden dock railing. My lake house sat 2 hours outside Plano, a small but comfortable retreat inherited from my grandmother. Autumn painted the surrounding trees in fiery oranges that reflected perfectly on the still water. "It was either here or my cramped apartment for all these boxes," I replied, hauling the last crate from my car. We'd spent the week transporting our historical treasure in careful stages, and now the evidence of our academic heist was safely stored in my home office. Smart move. No chance of the dean dropping by for coffee. Sienna smiled, taking the box from my arms. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, sending that now familiar current between us. The lake house had seemed like a logical solution to our storage problem. It wasn't until we arrived that I realized what I'd done. Invited a student to my private retreat far from professional boundaries and watchful eyes. But Sienna wasn't just any student anymore. She was my confidant. My research partner, the person who understood my academic passions better than colleagues I'd known for decades. "I thought we could organize everything in the spare room," I said, leading her inside. "There's plenty of shelf space for cataloging." We spent hours arranging books in chronological order, creating a proper archive of our discovery. As evening fell, exhaustion and satisfaction settled over us. "Wine?" I offered, closing the final catalog document on my laptop. "There's a bottle of Cabernet." Somewhere, Sienna stretched her sweater, riding up slightly to reveal a sliver of skin above her jeans. I looked away quickly. "Wine sounds perfect," she said, following me to the kitchen. With glasses in hand, we settled on the sofa before the fireplace. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the lake invisible except for moonlight glinting off its surface. The fire cast dancing shadows across, Sienna's features softening them, making her look both younger and somehow ageless. "I've been thinking about Eleanor and Margaret," Sienna said, tucking her feet beneath her. "Do you think they ever got moments like this just pieced together?" "I hope so," I replied, "though it would have been for riskier then. 2 female professors disappearing to a lake house together would have raised eyebrows, and now here, Yas met mine over her wineglass. I held her gaze. Now it's just 2 colleagues working on a research project. Is that what we are? Holly colleagues." The question hung between us, loaded with weeks of tension and unspoken feelings. I took a slow sip of wine before answering. "I think we both know we're more than that." "Then what are we afraid of?" The fire crackled in the silence that followed. I considered deflecting, changing the subject to safer territory. Instead, I found myself speaking truth. "I've spent my career studying women who defied convention, who risked everything for their authentic lives, but I've played it safe in my own department. Politics, tenure considerations, professional boundaries I've hidden behind them. And now I'm sitting here wondering why I let the institution define what's appropriate between 2 consenting adults." Sienna sat down her glass. "I've never been good at hiding what I want," she said quietly. "And right now, what I want is to go swimming." I blinked. It's November. The lake's not frozen. She stood, her intentions clear in her eyes, coming without waiting for an answer. She walked to the glass doors leading to the deck, slipping outside into the moonlight. I watched, transfixed, as she paused at the dock's edge, looking back at me over her shoulder before pulling her sweater over her head. My heart hammered against my ribs as I set down my wine and followed her outside. The night air bit at my skin, but something warmer was building. Inside me, something that had been smoldering for weeks. Sienna stood at the end of the dock in just her underwear, her pale skin luminous in the moonlight. "Last one in B's breakfast," she challenged before diving cleanly into the dark water. I hesitated only briefly before shedding my clothes down to my practical black underwear. The cold air was shocking, but not as shocking as my own boldness as I dove in after her. The water was breathtakingly cold, then oddly warm. As my body adjusted, I surfaced to find Sienna floating on her back, her red hair spreading around her like flames on the dark water. "You're crazy," I gasped, treading water near her. "Probably," she agreed, righting herself to face me. Water droplets clung to her eyelashes, catching the moonlight. "But you followed me anyway." We floated there, surrounded by darkness and silence. The boundaries between professor and student dissolved in the cold lake water. When her hand found mine, beneath the surface, I didn't pull away, and when she moved closer, her legs brushing against mine as we treaded water, I felt the last of my reservations dissolving like mist on the lake. "Holly," she whispered, her face inches from mine. "I think we've been writing our own love letters all semester." Her lips found mine in the moonlight tasting of wine and possibility, and I stopped fighting the current that had been pulling us together since that first shared ride to campus. December arrived with its customary end-of-semester frenzy. I sat in the department conference room attempting to focus on budget projections, while my thoughts continually drifted to the lake house weekend and the 3 subsequent weekends Sienna and I had spent there ostensibly organizing our historical findings. Professor Jenkins' Dean Marcus Whitmore's voice snapped me back to reality. "Your thoughts on the chair position?" I blinked, suddenly aware that a dozen faculty members were staring at me, expectantly. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?" The dean smiled indulgently. "The department chair position. With Dr. Hargrove retiring, the committee believes you're the natural successor. Your publication record is impeccable, and the university board appreciates your traditional approach to academia." Traditional approach, I echoed. Professionalism. He clarified propriety. "The board values faculty who maintain appropriate boundaries and present the right image. To donors and parents," his emphasis on appropriate boundaries sent a chill down my spine. Did he know about Sienna? Had someone seen us together at the lake house, or was this just standard administrative language? "I'm flattered." I managed to say, "May I have some time to consider?" "Of course. We'll need your decision." By January 10th, he smiled, all teeth and ambition. "The position comes with a substantial raise and priority funding for your research initiatives." After the meeting, I retreated to my temporary office in the East Wing. Mind racing. The department chair position had been my goal for years. More influence over curriculum, better research opportunities, higher profile in the academic community. Everything I'd worked toward since graduate school. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Professor Victor Langford stood in my doorway, his perpetually disapproving expression firmly in place. "Congratulations on the chair nomination," he said without warmth, though some of us were surprised by the choice. Lawrence had been gunning for department chair since arriving at the university. His resentment was expected, if unpleasant. "Nothing's decided," I replied neutrally. He stepped inside, closing the door partially. "You know, Holly, academia is changing, but certain standards remain. The board might reconsider if they knew about your situation." My pulse quickened. My situation. "I've seen you with that Turner girl." The redhead, his thin lips curved in what might generously be called asmile meetings in your office, after hours weekend trips. Rather unprofessional for someone being considered for leadership. I fought to keep my expression neutral while my mind raced. He'd been watching us. "Sienna Turner is my research assistant on a special project. Any meetings have been strictly academic. That's not what the graduate lounge gossip suggests." He leaned against my desk uninvited. I'd hate for the dean to hear such rumors during the final selection process. The threat hung in the air between us. I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze directly. "Are you threatening me?" "Lawrence. Warning you as a colleague." He moved toward the door. "Perhaps reconsider your extracurricular activities or your candidacy." After he left, I sat in stunned silence. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone, then withdrew. Calling Sienna from my office suddenly seemed dangerous. The walls too thin, too many ears listening. That evening, I texted her to meet at a coffee shop off campus instead of our usual hidden room rendezvous. Her face fell as I related Lawrence's thinly veiled threat. "He can't prove anything." She insisted. keeping her voice low despite our secluded corner table. He doesn't need proof, just rumors. I stared into my cooling tea. Amia runs on gossip and innuendo. So what do we do? Sienna asked, her blue eyes darkening with concern. The question weighed heavily between us. What would Eleanor and Margaret have done? Faced with similar threats, they had hidden away, created secret spaces for their love and work. But times had changed, hadn't they? Maybe we should cool things until after the chair. Appointment. I suggested, hating the words, even as they left my mouth. Sienna's face went perfectly still. Is that what you want? It's not about what I want. It's about being practical. Practical. She repeated the words, sounding like an accusation. Like Eleanor and Margaret were practical, hiding their entire lives away. That was different. Was it? Sienna gathered her coat movements, sharp with disappointment. I thought you were different, Holly. I thought you lived the principles you wrote about so passionately. Sienna, please. I need some time, she said quietly, to figure out if I can be someone's secret again. She softened slightly, touching my hand briefly. I care about you too much to stand in the way of what you've worked for all these years, but I care about myself too much to be hidden away. I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, taking with her the brightness that had illuminated my carefully ordered world. For the first time in my academic career, I questioned whether professional advancement was worth the price of authenticity, and whether I was brave enough to follow the path of the women whose history we'd discovered together. Christmas break arrived with an emptiness I hadn't felt in years. Campus had cleared out, and I'd retreated to my lake house, surrounded by the research materials that now seemed to mock me with their stories of hidden love and sacrifice. Sienna and I hadn't spoken since that night at the coffee shop. Her absence was a physical ache I couldn't shake. I spent days poring over Margaret and Eleanor's correspondence, searching for what wisdom permission their words had taken on new meaning since Sienna had walked away. On a particularly cold afternoon, I found a letter I'd overlooked before, tucked into the binding of an obscure poetry volume. Eleanor's handwriting, usually so controlled, was shaky with emotion. My dearest Margaret, they say Professor Winters was found dead in her office yesterday. The official story claims heart failure, but rumors whisper that she was discovered with letters from another woman. I fear for us both now. The dean has questioned me twice about our unusual collaboration. I cannot bear the thought of bringing scandal upon you. Is sat back, stunned. Professor Winters, another female faculty member, possibly dead because of revealed love letters. This wasn't just academic persecution. This was something far darker. I called the one person I knew could help Sienna. I found something you need to see. She arrived 2 hours later. Professional distance in her posture, but curiosity in her eyes. When I showed her the letters, she read it twice, her expression growing grave. If this is true, she said, Professor Winters may have been murdered or driven to suicide because her relationship with another woman was discovered, and Eleanor feared the same fate. I added, look at the date. 3 weeks before Margaret's sudden resignation. We fell back into our research rhythm, pulling threads and following leads. University archives yielded newspaper clippings about Professor Judith Winters' unexpected passing in 1926. Medical records from that era were sparse, but Sienna discovered a police report noting unusual circumstances that were never investigated. They covered it up, Sienna murmured, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by photocopies. The university couldn't risk the scandal. What happened to Margaret after she resigned? I wondered aloud. The letters stopped abruptly. Sienna opened her laptop. I've been searching genealogical databases. Margaret Wellington moved to France after leaving the university. She lived there until 1974, and Eleanor remained at the university until 1945, never married. Sienna looked up, her eyes bright with discovery. But here's the interesting part. She took a sabbatical to France every summer from 1927 until 1939, when the war made travel impossible. They didn't end things, I whispered. They found a way, different countries, separate lives for most of the year. But those summers together, we stared at each other across the sea of documents, the parallels to our own situation. Hanging unspoken between us, I need to find their families, Sienna said suddenly. Living descendants who might have letters, photographs, anything that could complete their story. It took 3 days of relentless searching, but Sienna finally located Margaret's great-niece living in Boston. A phone call and explanation of our research, and the woman agreed to speak with us. My great-aunt Margaret lived with her companion Eleanor in France. She told us via video call, showing us photographs of 2 elderly women. In a sunlit garden, the family never spoke of it directly, but everyone knew they were devoted to each other. After Eleanor died in 1976, Margaret followed within months. Did they ever regret leaving academia? I asked. Quite the opposite, Aunt Margaret wrote. Memoirs she never published. She said leaving that suffocating environment was her salvation. She and Eleanor translated poetry together in France, published under pseudonyms. After the call ended, Sienna and I sat in silence, absorbing the bittersweet resolution to our historical mystery. They found freedom, Sienna said finally, but they had to leave everything behind. Not everything, I corrected. They had each other, and their work continued just differently. We spent the evening organizing our findings, the weight of Margaret, and Eleanor's story, and Professor Winter's tragic end settling over us. As midnight approached, Sienna paused at the door. The university gala is tomorrow night. She said they'll announce the chair nomination publicly. I know, will you accept it? I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. The professional mask she'd worn had slipped, revealing the woman who had challenged me, inspired me, awakened me. I don't know yet, he answered honestly, but I do know I'm tired of hiding in secret rooms. She nodded once, understanding in her eyes. Whatever you decide, Holly, make sure it's truly what you want, not what some academic board thinks you should be. After she left, I stayed awake until dawn, reading the final letters Margaret and Eleanor had exchanged before their separation and eventual reunion. Their words echoed across decades, speaking directly to my own crossroads. Better a truthful exile than a dishonest belonging. The university gala glittered with pretension and ambition. Faculty, in rarely worn formal attire, mingled with wealthy donors and board members, everyone performing the careful dance of academic politics. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, champagne untouched in my hand, watching Dean Marcus Whitmore work the crowd. Professor Jenkins Lawrence Merritt appeared at my elbow, satisfaction evident in his smirk. Prepared your acceptance speech. The chair announcement comes after dinner. I'm still considering the position. I replied evenly. His eyebrows rose, considering. After 15 years climbing the departmental ladder, don't tell me you're declining because of personal complications. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Before I could respond, ripple moved through the crowd as Sienna entered the ballroom. Sam wore a simple emerald dress that caught the light as she moved. Her copper hair swept up elegantly. Several heads turned to watch her, including Lawrence's. The naked appreciation in his gaze sparked something possessive in me. If you'll excuse me, I said, leaving him mid-sentence. Sienna saw me approaching, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes held warmth. Professor Jenkins' lovely event. It would be lovelier if we could skip directly to the open bar, I said, making her smile despite herself. Before we could continue, Dean Marcus Whitmore clinked his glass for attention, directing everyone to their seats for dinner. I found myself at the head table, positioned prominently as the presumptive department chair nominee. From there, I could see Sienna seated with the other teaching assistants across the room. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded space. Throughout dinner, I barely registered the conversations around me. My thoughts kept returning to Margaret and Eleanor too. Their difficult choice between institutional acceptance and personal truth. When the dessert plates were cleared, Dean Marcus Whitmore approached the podium, and a hush fell over the room. Tonight, we honor excellence in academia, he began, launching into his prepared speech about university traditions and standards. I half listened, watching Sienna, instead remembering the lake water on her skin in the moonlight, her passion when discussing forgotten literature, her courage in facing historical truths. And so it is with great pleasure that I announce our nominee for the position of Department Chair of English Literature, Professor Dr. Nora Caldwell. Applause pulled me back to the moment I rose, mechanically making my way to the podium as, expected standing before my colleagues and university benefactors, I saw Lawrence's smug expression, the dean's approving nod, the polite attention of people who had no idea of the battle raging within me. Thank you for this honor. I began my prepared remarks, suddenly hollow in my mind. I looked down at my notes, then set them aside. For 15 years, I've dedicated myself to this institution and to the study of literature, particularly works that have been suppressed, censored, or forgotten. The audience nodded approvingly. This was familiar territory. Recently, I discovered something extraordinary, hidden within our very walls. I continued a secret room containing banned books and personal letters between two female professors, who taught here in the 1920s. One resigned. Suddenly, the other remained, living a half-life of separation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The dean shifted uncomfortably. Their story deserves to be told, not hidden away. I've decided to decline the A chair position to focus on writing their biography. The silence was immediate and complete. I saw shock on Lawrence's face, confusion on the dean's. Additionally, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I believe the university should establish a research center dedicated to literary works and voices that have been suppressed throughout history. The hidden room should be preserved as its centerpiece, not demolished in renovation. I found Sienna's eyes across the room, her face radiant with understanding. Professor Iris Monroe has been instrumental in this research. Her scholarship on marginalized voices in literature deserves recognition through a fellowship that I'm personally endowing with what would have been my chair salary increase. The dean cleared, his throat beside me, clearly trying to regain control of the situation, but I wasn't finished. Clara Winslow and Eleanor Blackwood chose truth over institutional approval. Their courage inspires me to do the same. I took a breath, stepping away from the safety of academia's carefully constructed boundaries, including acknowledging that Professor Turner and I are more than research colleagues. The scandal I'd feared for months rippled visibly. Through the room, Lawrence's expression was triumphant, but I no longer cared. Thank you for the nomination, but I choose a different path. I stepped away from the podium, heart pounding but conscience clear. The aftermath was a blur of whispers and stares. I made my way across the room to where Sienna stood, her eyes never leaving mine. That was quite an acceptance speech, she said quietly when I reached her. It was a rejection speech, actually, of the chair position. Yes, her smile was radiant, but you accepted something far more important. We left the gala together, ignoring the stares that followed us. Outside in the cool night air, campus buildings rose around us like silent witnesses to generations of hidden truths and difficult choices. What happens now? Sienna asked as we walked beneath. Trees that had seen countless students and professors pass beneath them. And we finish their story, I said, taking her hand openly, and start our own. Behind us, the hidden room waited to be revealed, its secrets finally emerging into the light, not as scandal, but as testimony to love's quiet persistence against all efforts to conceal it.